And we know that. We know that, like, when you're with your family, you can be very talkative and very active, but when you're working in the office, you can be very quiet and seem shy. And when I was in most places, like in school, I was very shy. But behind that microphone, I could be another person. I could be personable. I can be interesting. I could tell stories. That is the essence of social psychology, the power of the situation.
Welcome to Psych Sessions Re-Release. This is a curated series of episodes that we have recorded over the years that may have been lost in the library. So enjoy listening to some of the best from Psych Sessions.
Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode. This is Garth, and today I am so excited to be here in the home of Dr. Elliot Aronson, Distinguished Professor Emeritus at the University of California, Santa Cruz. And I am here today with a co-host as well. How would you describe yourself, Chris? Friend and publisher. And why don't you just describe maybe who you are and how you know Elliot?
I am Elliot's friend and former editor of his book, The Social Animal. And I would say I know Elliot for approximately 12 years, maybe a little bit more.
Well, thanks for coming all the way out to the West Coast to do this with me. You came from Connecticut and I came from Seattle. And Elliot, thank you for having us in your home and welcome.
It's great to have you. And Chris, I'm so glad it's not raining anymore today, so that you can enjoy Santa Cruz in addition to enjoying me.
Yes, I am too. And it is such a delight to be with you and to see you again. I think it's been maybe 4 years since I saw you last, right before COVID.
Just about 4 years, because COVID has really kept us bottled up a little bit.
So I don't know where to start. There's no way we are going to get to everything that I want to talk about with you today. I just... when we started corresponding, Elliot, you invited me to maybe take a look at your autobiography, and I plowed through it. It was so good. I've recommended it to so many of my colleagues now. It makes me a little upset that was out there the whole time and I just didn't know about it. But anyway, let's start there. What has that book, and everybody should just go pick it up and read it. If you're a psychology teacher, it's just going to make your teaching better. It's going to be very interesting to you. So what has that book meant to you now, 15 years later?
Well, it was both fun and painful to write, because I needed to be extremely truthful about my whole life, and a lot of it meant dredging up some things, my brother's death at the age of 32, and things that were not easy to bring back into consciousness, but I tried very hard to get all the important stuff in. Now, the reason I wrote it, I never thought I would ever write an autobiography, but the American Psychological Association has a series that comes out once every 15 or 20 years called The History of Psychology and Autobiography, and in which they invite, anywhere from 7 to 10 people to write a brief autobiography. And now there may be about 10 volumes of that out. And so they invited me to do that, and I wrote something, and I sort of liked what I wrote. And when I handed it in, the editor, Gardner Lindsay, said he liked it very much, but it was too long. It was 20% longer than anybody else's. And he asked me to cut 20%. And I said, how can I cut 20%? Do you mean I should cut every fifth page out? And I got really annoyed, and we had a big argument about it. And then he finally said, hey, you can submit this and then expand and cut it back and then expand the original one a little bit, and you'd have a book. And since I grew up in the Depression, in the Great Economic Depression, I never throw anything out. So I hated to throw out 20% of that book. And I took Gardner's advice, and I expanded it into a book. And the next thing I knew, I really liked it, because with the book I could include an awful lot about my family and my upbringing and my childhood and things of that sort. And I realized what I had, at the very least, was something that my grandchildren might enjoy reading. And much to my surprise, it got really good reviews, and a lot of people say they like it. So,
yeah, and
that's nice.
The folks who endorsed it, who reviewed it, that is a who's who list of folks. So many great reviews. It was obviously a book that resonated with folks. And, you know, and I know we're going to get into the stories, because the stories are unbelievable in my mind. And I was just wondering, how did you learn to write like that? Because I don't know. If I was expecting a researcher to write an autobiography, I don't think it would have been weaved together so masterfully. There's a lot of things that come back around in the story, some threads, and maybe, you know, I don't know, how aware are you of those threads? For example, I know why you spent so much time talking about your brother early on and the influence of him, but it was like a gut punch to the reader when, as you mentioned, your brother passes away. So how thoughtful was kind of thinking through the timeline and really bringing back themes and those kinds of things?
I never took a course in writing. I never was formally taught anything about writing. I think I take teaching very seriously. And I always loved teaching the introductory social psychology course, because I really I love social psychology, and I love being the first person to introduce freshmen and sophomores to this field, because it's such an exciting field. And I like to be first. I like to be the one that shows them how important this stuff is and how interesting it is. And so as a teacher, as a lecturer, I often taught very large classes. Like sometimes my class in introductory social psychology would have 600 or 700 students in it. And when you teach a large number of students, you really need to keep them awake. And I think I learned to be a really good storyteller, and I teach in a way that tells the story, that really tells social psychology like a good story that's supported and backed up by the experiments we do in social psychology. But the story is about real people experiencing social psychological events, and then the research comes in to show that that's not just a fluke. This is the way things are. And that has made me a better writer, because I write the way I teach. And what my friends say when they read things that I've written, even journal articles, they say they can hear my voice. And I think that's the greatest compliment I can ever get.
So how did you learn to become this storyteller? I think, was it one of your first teaching experiences? Was it at Wesleyan? How did that come about?
It may have started when I was 14 years old and was working on the boardwalk at Revere Beach in Massachusetts. I was working at the Pocorino tables making change. And all right, here comes the first story of this interview. in that game, you roll a ball down an incline and into various pockets that it can land, and you get 5 balls for a nickel. That's what it cost in those days, in the 1940s, and you play for prizes, and you try to get the best poker hand you can get. And I was just making change for 60. I was being paid 60 cents an hour for that. And then one rainy night, there was a mic man who tries to bring people into the arcade to play the game. And he was an older person. He was in his 30s or 40s. Most of the people working there were teenagers like myself. I was 14 years old. And he was on the mic, and he said to me, "Hey, kid, you want to sit up here and see if you can get people to play the game?" It was near the end of the evening. It was rainy. There was hardly anyone on the boardwalk, and there was really no business. Nobody was playing. And I thought, my God, I can get behind the mic. And I sat up there in the box with the mic in front of me. And I started to tell stories. I started to say, "Hey, there's 3 jacks on table number 27 and a full house on table number 16. Pay off those lucky winners." There was nobody playing the game, but I just made it up as I went along. And every once in a while, someone walking by would stick their head in to see what all the commotion was about. And they saw that nobody was playing, but this kid on the microphone was making believe that people were playing. And I think some of them were charmed, and they came in and played the game. And what happened was, I think half the people walking on the boardwalk ended up in that arcade playing Pokerino. And we had about 12, 13 people. The manager of the arcade came out of his office because he heard a lot of noise, and he said, "What's going on here? And who's on the mic?" And there's that kid, and he offered me a job as a mic man. And I think that I was a shy kid, but when I got behind the microphone, I became a different person, and I was able to get rid of my shyness.
Was this the beginning of your acting career?
May have been, and I used that quality as teaching, but not only that. What I later learned, eventually, when I became a social psychologist, is that the essence of social psychology, say as opposed to or as different from personality, for example, is that we believe that situations are really important, and that the same person can be very, very different depending on the situation. And we know that. We know that, like, when you're with your family, you can be very talkative and very active, but when you're working in the office, you can be very quiet and seem shy. And when I was in most places, like in school, I was very shy. But behind that microphone, I could be another person. I could be personable. I can be interesting. I could tell stories. That is the essence of social psychology, the power of the situation. And that's what we learn from our experiments, the famous Stanley Milgram experiment shows that kind people can behave with cruelty if the situation is powerful enough. Honest people can behave dishonestly if the situation is powerful enough. Shy people can behave assertively if the situation is powerful enough. That's an important lesson, and that's the essence of social psychology. Things can change. Situations can change behavior. Hopefully for the better, sometimes for the worse.
Yeah. Now, we can edit, and I just wanted to make sure that you don't need to talk to your wife, who's putting on her jacket right now.
Hi, honey.
I just had to go out for a little while.
Okay, honey. I'll see you later.
So I was thinking about that boardwalk scene and you getting on that microphone, being a shy kid, but having all that success. I saw that later in your career, in your book, not only in your teaching, but also in your experimentation and your ability to, because what's a social psychology experiment, or the social psychology experiments that you did? What are those if you can't sell it, if you can't sell the deception, right? So would you say that what you tapped into on the boardwalk was helpful in that area as well for you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's like I wasn't trying to deceive anyone. I was just trying to be playful. And what social psychology experimentation requires is that the experimenter needs to be a kind of a playwright, a kind of a director, and a kind of an actor. You need those three skills in addition to being a pretty good scientist. So when you design an experiment, in essence, what you're doing is writing a play, a scenario where in a really good experiment, the participant in the experiment is embedded in a scenario where he or she is in the scenario but doesn't realize it's a scenario, believes that this is a real event happening to them. And again, if you take the famous Milgram experiment where people thought they were giving severe electric shocks to an innocent person as part of a learning experiment, and they were giving shocks eventually up to 400 volts out of blind obedience to an authority figure, they were sweating real sweat. They were in that scenario. It was from the experimenter's perspective, it was a scenario. From the participants' perspective, it was something really happening that they were really doing, and they were really hurting another person in order to be obedient and to the scientist running this experiment, and yet they were in great conflict and were terribly anxious about it. So it was real for them. And that's an extreme case, but it's the essence of what we do in the laboratory, because the last thing we want to happen is for the participant to sit back, hear the instruction from the experimenter, and in a calm and casual way start thinking about, let's see, what would a normal average person do in this situation, and then try to do it. So, because everybody wants to be normal and no one wants to be extreme in any way, and they will try to behave in the way that they think would make them look good in the eyes of the experimenter. That's the last thing we want to happen. And in order to prevent that from happening, we need to write a scenario and perform that scenario in a way that truly embeds the participant into this drama that he's a part of.
So one of my favorite parts of this book, I teach a research methods class. I've actually been reading your book this term, as storytelling with my students as I'm teaching them this course. But there's this one moment in this book where I think you're explaining the need for deception to, I think it's Gordon Allport. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And in the scene, I felt like I think you said it in your book. You couldn't believe his question. Could you just talk about that if you know what I'm talking about?
I'm trying to remember.
Okay. It had to do with the necessity of deception. And, I think the question was...
Yeah. When I first started teaching at Harvard, Gordon Allport was the most distinguished person in the department. And I was a very young guy. I had just gotten my doctorate, and that was my first job. And he invited me to give a talk in his class. And he introduced me as a master of mendacity. And I was so naive. I was 27 years old, and I wasn't quite sure what mendacity meant, but I knew it wasn't good. So I felt a little stung by that introduction. And then afterwards, Gordon and I gave a lecture, and then Gordon and I are walking out, and I said, "Hey, Gordon, what was this mendacity thing? Were you simply telling your students that I'm a good liar?" And he got very embarrassed. He actually turned red, and he said, "Oh, come on into my office." And I went into his office, and we chatted about it. And he made it very clear that he didn't approve of the kind of research I did, because we used deception. And we frequently, and almost always, told the participant that the experiment was about one thing when it was really about something else. And we did that because if the participant knew what the experiment was about, they would try to make it come out the way we wanted it to come out, or they would try to behave in a way that made themselves look good, but it wouldn't be an accurate representation. So we had to be good at making up a cover story that was convincing to the participant. And I tried to explain all that to Gordon, and I tried to tell him, and I had enormous respect for this guy. I always have had respect for him. He was a wonderful guy, but didn't really understand this kind of experimentation. And I had to explain to him that it wasn't, I didn't consider it deception. I considered it theatrical. Yes. That when you go to a theater to see Hamlet, you know that guy wearing these clothes with the pantaloons and all of that stuff, that's not the way he usually dresses, and you know that he isn't really thinking about killing his uncle. He's just an actor. But when you go there, you try to be in the play, and we don't expect the participant in the experiment to try to be in the play. We have to set it up so that they think they're in the play, so they think they're in a real world situation that's really happening, or else it's not, or else the experiment isn't going to mean anything. And that's why we do it that way. And I think in that discussion, and he took me to lunch afterwards. I think I got him to feel bad about using the word mendacity on this young whippersnapper. So he took me to lunch at the faculty club, which was a big deal at Harvard, and we talked about all of this stuff. And I think I convinced him that there was a reason why we did this, that it wasn't just fun and games. We didn't do it this way because we liked fooling people. We did it this way because it's the best and perhaps the only way to do research in this area and to get results that make sense and are real and true, because we are dealing with intact grown-ups. We're not dealing with children. We're dealing with people who have been. Everybody is an amateur social psychology. Everybody has notions about interpersonal relations because we've been doing it all our lives. So the 18 and 19-year-olds we're using as the participants in most of our experiments are really smart human beings, and that's why getting them embedded in the scenario is extremely important.
Yeah, that reminds me of a story that you tell, and it's a prime example of this, I think, when you were working with Leon Festinger and Carlsmith had an experiment, but it just wasn't working too well until you came along and helped this experiment out. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. Festinger and I had this very interesting relationship where everybody was afraid of Festinger because he was a tough guy and very impatient he didn't suffer fools gladly. And when I was a first-year graduate student at Stanford, Festinger and I arrived the same year, and he arrived with a reputation for being a genius and absolutely impossible to work with. And I took his seminar, and I saw that both of these things, that the rumors were true in both directions. He was a genius, extremely smart, and also very impatient, could be cruel in the seminar to people. If you didn't come in fully prepared, not only having done the reading, but having thought about it and really, really digested it, he could be devastating. And I was afraid of him, but gradually we got to be pretty close. And I started to work with him, and I did some research that he liked. And then he was doing this experiment with Merrill Carlsmith, who was an undergraduate at Stanford at the time. This was Merrill's senior honors thesis. And the experiment, it's one of my favorite experiments in social psychology, and it involved telling a lie, deceiving. The participant in the experiment has done a very boring task and then is supposed to tell the person who's going to participate in the experiment next that the task was interesting. Because the cover story is, we want to see whether thinking a task is interesting will actually make the person enjoy the task more than if he doesn't think it's interesting. And then you tell him or her, you were in the control condition. We didn't tell you it was interesting in advance, but the person waiting out there is going to be in the experimental condition, and we need to tell that person that the experiment was interesting. And then you say that the person who's supposed to do that, the stooge in the experiment who's supposed to pretend to be a subject, hasn't shown up, and would you do that for me? Mm-hmm. Now, and there are two conditions. You either do it, you paid $1 for doing it, or you paid $20 for doing it. And the hypothesis was that people who were paid only $1 would like the task, would find it more interesting than people who were paid $20. Telling a lie for $1, because if you're paid $20, in effect what you're saying is, I told a lie to this person, I deceived this person, but I got paid $20. I sold my soul for $20, and it was a good bargain. It was worth it. But if you sell your soul for only $1, then you say, gee, why did I do that? And then say, well, the task wasn't so bad. It was actually pretty interesting. The task actually involved turning a screw a quarter of a turn or packing spools in a box. It couldn't be more boring for a long period of time. It's very boring, but you said it was interesting. And if you said it for $1, you came to believe that it wasn't so boring. If you said it for $20, you said, it's boring. I lied, but it was worth it. I got $20, which is a marvelous experiment because at that time, this was done in 1957. It flew in the face of reinforcement theory. When I got to Harvard a few years later as an assistant professor, and I had lunch with B.F. Skinner, he couldn't explain that experiment. He had a hard time accounting for those results. That's what made it an important experiment. But anyway, Carlsmith was running subjects in a pilot study to test out the procedure, and it wasn't working. And Carlsmith was really depressed and said, it's not working. I'll have to do something else. And Leon asked me if I would watch Merrill work with him. The two of us were standing on the other side of the one-way mirror watching Merrill run subjects. And Leon turned to me and said, what do you think? And I said, he's not really selling it. He's not really convincing the participant that this is a real event. And so Leon looked at me, stroked his chin a little bit and said, teach him. So I worked with Merrill for 3 or 4 days. And I told him, you can't just say, the other person hasn't shown up. Would you mind doing this for me? You have to be anxious. You have to say, oh my God, the subject has been, this new person has been waiting out there for 20 minutes. This guy hasn't shown up. I don't know what to do. I can't afford to lose the subject. It'll ruin the experiment. Would you do me this favor? I mean, I'll pay you for it. And you have to sweat. You have to strain. You have to make sure that that person knows that you're in trouble and is doing this for money, but also as a favor to you. And you really have to sell it. And to do that, you have to be a good actor. And I worked with Merrill for 3 or 4 days. He started to run the subjects, and suddenly it was working. And that's part of the game. You have to be good at this, or else it's not going to work. Or else, and that is in. It's acting in the essence of finding the truth about human behavior, because it is a matter of selling the scenario to the participant so the participant is fully involved and not stepping back and, as I said before, deciding how is a person supposed to behave in this situation, which is the normal human tendency to do. We need to make sure that the participant is in the situation.
When you, in your book, are discussing these experiments, either you came to this, I can't remember if you came to this conclusion or if I did, or this aha moment that cognitive dissonance has to do with the self-concept, the way you see yourself. And I'll just say that I think for anybody who teaches an introductory psychology course, most of us cover cognitive dissonance, and it's very hard for students to understand it. I actually think it's hard for faculty to understand it well and to really get the nuance of what happened in those experiments, in the initiation experiment, in the lying experiment. What would you, or maybe could you just talk about self-concept and cognitive dissonance?
Yeah. Well, that's a big argument that Leon Festinger and I had, where his notion of cognitive dissonance, his notion, I mean, he invented it, it was his, is that cognitive dissonance exists when a person holds two cognitions where the one is the opposite of the other, but he holds them both. And this is a negative drive state, like hunger or thirst, except it takes place in your brain and it makes you uncomfortable, and you have to find a way to reduce it, either by changing cognition A or changing cognition B, or both, to bring them closer together, or coming up with a third cognition which will help erase or eliminate some of the contradictions in those two cognitions. After working with cognitive dissonance theory for 3 or 4 years, I realized that I was excited by it. I thought it was a terrific theory, and it led to some really interesting research and helped us understand human behavior and human nature a lot more. But it was a little shaky around the edges. Sometimes it wasn't clear whether two cognitions would be really dissonant or not. And I don't think Festinger ever really solved that problem. But when I started to do a lot of my own experiments on it, I realized that dissonance theory makes the clearest prediction in those situations where one of the cognitions is about the self. And when the self is in conflict or in contradiction to a piece of behavior which clashes with the person's conception of who he is. And when I started to think in those terms, then if you look at the Festinger-Carlsmith experiment, for example, what Festinger would say is the two cognitions that are dissonant is I thought the task was boring, and I told that person it was interesting. Those are the opposite of each other, and you reduce dissonance by convincing yourself that it was more interesting than you initially thought it was. And that's very sensible. I would put it differently. I would say the first cognition is, I am an honest, honorable person, and I deceived a human being by saying that a boring task was really interesting, okay? So the self-concept is involved in that, but it's important to the researcher in making that explicit in my mind that is the motivating force, the person's self-concept, and that makes it powerful, so that whenever the self-concept is involved, we have an experiment that really works. When the self-concept isn't involved, it's sometimes a little bit shaky. We don't know whether that's a dissonant situation or not. So we designed our experiments to force the person to think about who he is and what he has done in violation of that. Now, in teaching this stuff, I always found that it was easier for students to grasp in the self-concept sense, that they could easily put themselves in that situation. Oh, yeah, I would feel lousy if I was lying to someone because I'm a truthful person. Not two simple cognitions. It's I'm a truthful person. Or in the first experiment I ever did, which showed that if you go through a severe initiation in order to get into a group, you'll like that group better than if you get into the group by going through a mild initiation or no initiation at all. Same group, same tape recording of a group discussion, and people who go through the severe initiation find the group a much more attractive group as a result of that initiation. And that, by talking about it in terms of the self-concept, you can say, before the self-concept notion came in, you could say, I did a stupid thing. With the self-concept, I did something stupid. I went through a terrible hell and high water in order to get into a group that turned out to be lousy. That was a dumb thing to do. But I'm a smart person. Why did I do such a dumb thing? That's the self-concept notion. It's not simply two cognitions are dissonant. One of those cognitions is about who I am, which is really important. It isn't that I did one thing and it's inconsistent with that the group turned out to be lousy. That's inconsistent with going through a severe initiation. It's, I'm a smart person. Why the hell did I go through that severe initiation in order to get into a group that I'm trying to get out of? You know, that
it troubles me when I think about the implications for myself, but probably larger, like for humanity. Who am I? And why do I hold the beliefs, and how am I justifying the things that I'm doing? I'm sure you've thought about these questions for a long, long time.
A long, long time, and boy, especially nowadays,
Yes.
What I'm about to say may be jumping the gun a bit, but we're living in an era. This is the decade of dissonance. I've never seen more evidence in the world of the existence of cognitive dissonance and looking at how people are dealing with it, people in public life. So you get something like my favorite example, the January 6th congressional hearings about the insurrection in Washington following Biden's election, where Trump got people to believe, he got his followers to believe that the election was stolen, and they stormed the Capitol. In the hearings, one of the people who testified was one of my favorite people. I watched those hearings avidly. One of my favorite people testifying was a guy named Russell Bowers, and people called him Rusty, and he was the Speaker of the House of Representatives of the state of Arizona. A good, solid Republican his whole life. And Trump asked him to get rid of the people who were elected, the electors, and to put in a whole new slate of people who would decide that he had won the Arizona election. And Bowers refused to do it because that would be taking the votes away from the people of Arizona and pretending that Trump won when actually Biden won. Bowers was a good Republican, but also a stand-up guy, a stalwart guy, a really decent fellow. And he said, I took an oath. I think he's a religious man. I took an oath that I would uphold the Constitution, and I had to uphold the Constitution. He paid a big price for that, because not only was Trump threatening him that he would primary him. Primary has become a verb. He would primary him by running somebody against him and supporting that person, so he would be out of politics. But it was even worse than that. At the time, right after the election, Bauer's daughter had a terminal disease and was at home dying. Trump supporters came with sound trucks and megaphones, bullhorns, to Bauer's home, stood outside his home and were screaming, "Rusty Bowers is a pedophile," which he wasn't. So he paid a big price for that. And there he was testifying to that, all of that, at the January 6th hearings. Stand-up guy. After the hearings were over, a reporter asked him, if Trump is nominated by the Republican Party in the next presidential election, would you vote for him? And he said, yes. He said, yes. And I'm thinking, how could he possibly do that? The dissonance must be enormous. How is that guy justifying it? Are the Democrats really that bad that you would elect a person who wanted you to lie, who was starting an insurrection against the government, who led an attack on the Capitol of the United States, who was threatening to hang his own vice president because his own vice president wouldn't go along, and you're going to support that guy in the next election? That is an amazing real-life dissonance situation. I would love to be able to have a long interview with Rusty Bowers on that one.
Yeah, I see Festinger's theory and the theory that you did so much work with in your career as explaining so much current behavior, and also when I look in a mirror, explaining a lot of my behavior and wondering about myself and the reason why maybe I do what I do and or hold the opinions that I hold. It's very practical, and my students really enjoy thinking through those kinds of questions as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And it makes me think about, how do you counter or try to reduce or improve, for lack of a better word, the cognitive dissonance so that people realize that their behavior is going against what their real beliefs are deep down. And I think you talk about some things that you did in your experiments. If you want to talk about that, like with students, you got them, getting them to use condoms, I think, and how that changed some behavior.
Oh, yeah. Well, that was... Again, that's another one of the threads that runs through the autobiography is, why did I get into psychology in the first place, and why did I get into social psychology? And it's so interesting because for me, what's really important is that the people who have played a major role in my life during my formative years, and I was really lucky in that when I was an undergraduate, I actually stumbled into a class that was being taught by Abraham Maslow. I didn't know who he was. I only went to that class because I was having coffee with a young woman, a fellow student, an attractive young woman who I was interested in romantically, and we were having coffee together, and then she suddenly looks at her watch and says, "Oh my God, I'm going to be late for class." And it turns out this was a big lecture class, and I figured, I'll go with her to her class, and we can maybe sit in the back of the room and hold hands or something. Those were innocent times. Maslow, it was a class being taught by Abraham Maslow in introductory psychology. And so I'm sitting there holding hands with this young woman, and suddenly Maslow starts talking about prejudice. And I remember when I was a kid, and I lived in a very anti-Semitic neighborhood, and my parents were Orthodox Jews, and I had to go to Hebrew school. And make a long story short, I was roughed up a lot for being Jewish in that neighborhood. And I remember after one beating, I was about 9 years old, sitting on a curbstone, nursing a bloody nose and a split lip, and wondering why these kids hated Jews so much, and why they hated me so much when they didn't even know me, and wondering if they found out what a nice little boy I was, would they like me more, even though I was Jewish? And if they liked me more, even though I was Jewish, would that maybe make them hate other Jews less? And those were thoughts that I was having. And then I was 9 years old. Then 10 years later, I'm sitting in this class of Maslow's, and Maslow is raising the same questions about prejudice, about how is prejudice formed, how can it be changed, and is it changed through the experience of having a good experience with some member of the group that you're prejudiced against, and stuff like that. And I'm thinking, and I didn't know, I hadn't realized that psychology contained things like that. I thought, when I was 19 years old, I thought psychology was all about therapy. I thought it was all about Freud. I didn't know that they asked questions like that. I was I had decided to major in economics, and not liking it very much, but I thought that it was important to learn something practical. And I had a stupid notion of why you go to college. I grew up during the Depression. My father was uneducated and unemployed during the Depression, and we were very, very poor. And I figured, the reason I'm in college, and then my father died when I was a junior in high school. And then I thought, I'm in college. I should find out how to earn a living, and so I'm majoring in economics. It was really a stupid decision. Not that there's anything wrong with economics, but not for me. And anyway, I immediately switched my major to psychology, and eventually got to know Maslow and became a protege of his. Now, Maslow was, as most psychologists know, was a humanistic psychologist, one of the founding fathers of humanistic psychology, and had this firm belief that psychology can and should be used to better the human condition, to give something back to humanity. And that's the reason I decided to go to graduate school in psychology, was for that reason. When I got to Stanford and met Leon Festinger, he got me so excited about doing research because Festinger didn't give a fig about improving the human condition. Festinger's only goal was to find out how the human mind worked. That, to him, was the most exciting thing in the world, the human mind, just to know how it works. And when I started to do experiments and realized that I had a knack for doing that, for designing experiments, for writing scenarios, for acting in them, for directing other people to do it well and stuff like that, when I realized that was a skill that I really loved having and I could use, I sort of forgot about my original goal, which was to do something for humanity. And then an interesting thing happened. When I was teaching at the University of Texas, the schools were desegregated. Finally, this was in 1971, and all hell broke loose. Black kids, white kids, and Mexican-American kids were at each other's throats. Fist fights were breaking out in the corridors. These were kids who were residentially segregated, so they didn't know each other. When desegregation occurred, they were thrust together in the same school for the first time. They were interacting, and it wasn't a good scene for them. And so when the assistant superintendent of schools, who was a former student of mine at the University of Texas, called me up and asked me if I could do something to be helpful. And that's when we invented the jigsaw classroom. And that's when I realized, when I rediscovered my motivation to do good in the world with psychology. And ultimately, Chris, you asked the question, and it took me a long way to get to it.
But that was a great way to get there.
Ultimately, I mean, so my career was, I started out being interested in doing good. Then I met Festinger, and I really decided that what I wanted to do was find out how the human mind worked, and I loved doing that stuff. And then in Austin, Texas, I got re-motivated to do good because the jigsaw classroom was working and really did well. Got people cooperating with one another in small groups, mixed racial and ethnic groups, and through the essence of cooperation, began to see things in each other that were positive that they never would have seen in the usual competitive raise your hand, get the teacher's attention situation, and prejudice gradually diminished in these classrooms. So I realized I could do good by doing good research. And then the next step on this career journey of mine was to find a way to do both, to do experiments that would enlighten me about how the human mind worked and at the same time might be useful. And so one of the things I did was experiments on using cognitive dissonance to get people, sexually active people, to use condoms, because in the time of AIDS or any sexually transmitted disease, but in the 1980s and 90s, AIDS was killing people, and that was before they had any kind of cure or vaccine for it. So that the best cure was prevention. And what Nancy Reagan was advocating was abstinence, which go tell that to a 20-year-old young adult. That's not going to work for a great many people. But condom use does work and is 99.999% effective. So the idea was to get people to use condoms, and the way we got them to do it was to put them in a dissonant situation that was not unlike the Festinger-Carlsmith experiment that I just described, except for one thing, which was a very interesting thing. In the Festinger-Carlsmith experiment, people are telling a lie about something and then coming to believe it. But in our situation, every college student student knew that condom use was a good way to prevent sexually transmitted diseases if you were sexually active. They knew that, but they simply weren't using them. Only about 17% of students on my campus were using them, and that was similar in every campus in the country at that time. And so how do you get it? How do you get it a lot higher than that? And so what we did was we did a variation on Festinger and Carlsmith, a major variation, where we got sexually active students to compose and deliver a speech that we told them was going to be given as part of sexual education courses to high school students about the use of condoms and why it was useful to use condoms in order to prevent sexually transmitted diseases. Students were very happy to do that. And we tape recorded it, we videotaped it, and told them we were going to be showing them in these classes. And then we interviewed, in half the conditions, we interviewed subjects afterwards and got them to talk about their own condom use, and got them to tell us about how difficult it was and why they didn't use condoms as often as they thought they should, etc. And we rubbed their noses in it. We actually got them to confront their own hypocrisy. Here they were telling these kids to use condoms, but they themselves weren't using it. And so this was a new paradigm for cognitive dissonance theory, which my students and I dubbed the hypocrisy paradigm. It could have just as easily, we could have dubbed it the integrity paradigm, because in effect what we're saying is, if you're preaching the use of condoms and you're not practicing what you preach, there's a dissonance situation that's very, very powerful in terms of the self-concept model of dissonance. And then how do you reduce that dissonance? You damn well better start practicing what you just got through preaching. And that's what happened. We went from 17% to close to 80% of the students in our condition, in that experimental condition, started to use condoms regularly, sexually active students. And that was a very, very powerful finding. We did the same thing with water conservation. California always has a perennial water shortage, and our university was trying to get people to take shorter showers. Well, our students are really environmentally conscious. They're forever saving the whales or saving the redwoods or what have you. But taking short showers is something they didn't want to do, because taking a shower is not just a matter of getting clean. I mean, the university is saying, oh, you turn on the shower, get wet, turn it off, soap yourself up, then get under the shower, turn it back on, rinse off the soap. The whole thing can take 2 or 3 minutes and you're done. But showers are luxurious things, and people like to I like to luxuriate under the shower and take at least 10 or 15 minutes. I really enjoy that. So students weren't doing it. The university was trying very hard. They were putting up posters and signs and giving out pamphlets and things, but there wasn't any reduction in the use of water on campus. And then we went in with using the hypocrisy paradigm by getting people to sign a poster. It was a poster that was posted in the field house that said, "Conserve water, take short showers. If I can do it, so can you." And then you print your name in big block letters and sign your name underneath that poster. And there were a lot of signatures on it, and the person would and people would go up and read those posters and look at the signatures and stuff like that. So people were making a public commitment to that. And the key phrase is, if I can do it, so can you. Then we had somebody posted in the shower room with a waterproof stopwatch, and they would time people as they came in. And we found that people were taking much shorter showers when we got them to do that than when we didn't. So it really worked. It was good for the world. It was good for the people, and it opened a whole new paradigm of cognitive dissonance theory.
When you were at UC Santa Cruz, which you were at for 25 years, is that right?
Yeah.
When you were there, you had an incident that you reflect on in your book because of a visiting speaker named Arthur Jensen.
Yeah.
Could you just talk about that a little bit, and maybe you have some thoughts about where we're at right now with higher education or culture?
Yeah. Arthur Jensen was a professor in the education department of University of California at Berkeley, and he had done some really good research. And right now he was doing research that led him to the belief that there were racial differences in IQ that might be genetic. Now, that's a difficult thing to say out loud in this culture, and even a difficult thing to hypothesize. And the graduate students in my department formed the colloquium committee invited Jensen to come and give a talk. Colloquium for psychology graduate students and faculty. We had these small colloquia in a small seminar room. I was the chair of the department at the time, and when the graduate students told me that they wanted to invite Jensen, I was not in favor of it. So I just want to make that clear. I wasn't a crusader. I wasn't crusading for freedom of speech. I didn't want to go out of my way to start trouble. But they wanted to do it. And when I told them, are you sure you really want to do that? And they said, oh, yeah, because then we can really read his stuff very carefully and maybe find flaws in his research or get him to think twice about it or something like that. And they were very excited about that, to invite someone who they disagreed with so that they could try to find something that they could criticize in his research. And I figured, look, let him come. It's fine. About 2 weeks before he came, he sent me a letter, a real letter. It came in, that the postman delivered, with some newspaper clippings. And apparently he had been pushed around a lot and spit on and stuff like that on college campuses around the country when he talked about his research. And he said, I'm through doing that, so that I'll come if you can guarantee my safety and that no one is going to harass me. And when I got that, I said, look, I wrote back to him and I said, look, we have this little seminar room where there were 6 or 7 faculty members would come and maybe 15 graduate students, and we would sit around, and our graduate students have never, or neither our faculty or our graduates, they've never spit on anybody yet. But then the night before he was supposed to come, the students got wind of it and staged a rally in which they burned his books and his reprints of some of his research articles and things like that. And they announced that they were going to storm the seminar room and fix him. So I didn't know what to do, and there wasn't much time to think about it. I thought, well, there are two options. I can tell him not to come, cave into the student bullying, or I can call the police and have police protection. I didn't like either of those two options, and I thought about it some more, and I thought, oh, there is a third option. We can move it off campus. It can be an off-campus event. And we can, since it's a small group of people that's involved, we just tell them orally about it and put a note on the door that we moved off campus and not tell them where it is. And that's what we did. And we had a terrific evening. I mean, Jensen gave his talk. The students and the faculty had questions and criticisms, and it was a lively and exciting discussion. The students were right to invite him. It was really good. But afterwards, I got totally vilified in the student newspaper, and I was called a racist, and they're really angry for two reasons. One, for inviting him, and since I was the chair, I took responsibility. And the other, for moving it off campus, not giving them a chance to get at him. So that was interesting. Now, the really interesting part of this is that when I was at the University of Texas earlier, and I was there for 10 years, 9 or 10 years, we got a fair housing ordinance on the books. Austin was a pretty good city, but it was racist, and it was hard for Black and Mexican-American students to find housing anywhere near the campus. The Black students had to live in the Black section of town. If students were not living in dormitories, they couldn't live near campus. They couldn't rent a room near campus. So we wanted to get a fair housing ordinance passed. There were none south of the Mason-Dixon line at that time. And so this ordinance came up before the city council. And prior to that, I did a little experiment with my graduate students and a couple of the undergraduates where we sent, there were ads for housing near campus, and we would send a Black student, well-dressed, well-spoken, to that place, and they were told every single time the place was rented. And then half hour later, we would send a white student, and they rented him the apartment. It was like clockwork. So we brought those data. I really did that experiment just for the city council, showing that it's real, that if you're a racial minority, you cannot get fair housing. And the city council passed it by one vote. I think it was a vote of 4-3 or something like that. A couple of nights later, at 2 o'clock in the morning, my phone rang, and I answered it because when the phone rings at 2 o'clock in the morning, you think it may be important. Somebody died or something. But it was a guy, a gravelly voiced guy, saying, "I know where you live," calling me a lover, saying, "I know where you live, and I know you have 4 young kids. I don't want any of your kids to get hurt, but we're going to be coming to your house, and if your doorbell rings at night, make sure you answer the door, because we're going to be there with double-barreled shotguns, and we don't want to hurt your kids. Wow. It was a little scary, and I called the police and told them about it, and they said, "Oh well, there's nothing we can do if that's no crime. We can't do anything about it. We certainly can't post a guard at your house." In effect, he's saying you're not that important, and there was something about his tone which I got the feeling that he was saying, "Well, that's what you get for meddling in our business," So it was kind of scary, but nothing happened. He said something like, the cop said, "Oh, chances are he's just trying to scare you." And I said, "He's succeeding." But nothing really came of it, thank goodness. But, it was a little tense for a few months. Now then a few years later, I changed jobs. I decided I want to live in California, and it was very interesting to me personally that this time I did get a call. It didn't come at 2:00 in the morning. It came 7:00 in the evening, I think. And a kid said to me, "Are you going to keep your office hours tomorrow?" And as you often do at the coffee house. And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, you better be there." And I said, "Yeah, I'll be there." And then the next day, and so did 3 of my kids were students at the university, my 3 oldest kids. And when Vera told them about it, they all came to the coffee house, and we were meeting outside having coffee, the 4 of us. And then there was like a line of students carrying torches in the daytime, and a tape recorder, and they came to my table and said into the tape recorder the accusation that I brought this person to campus that who was preaching this racist stuff, and what do I have to say for myself, and then put the microphone in front of me, and I gave them a little talk about the First Amendment and how important it was, and how, especially at a university, how important it is to hear people talk about things that we might not agree with, and to be able to engage in a sensible conversation about it. And eventually they just packed up and left. But it was the contrast in my mind was really powerful. I used to always think that my political enemies were always on the extreme right, and then to find that they were also on the extreme left. And some of the things that are happening now, it's very similar to me. I find it's really difficult for me to disagree with people on the left, but I often do. I often think that, they're going too far too fast. And I don't agree with people like in some of the trans things. I don't agree with the people who say that, what about bathrooms? That's terrible. Who's going to use what bathroom? It's going to be confusing. I think people can get used to that one. But I would be in favor of not humiliating the people who are uncomfortable about it. I think that one needs to have a kind of a progressive, balanced view with care for the people who disagree with you. even if you think they're wrong. And that's really what part of what a university should be about. And, I was wrong when I was a sophomore. It's not about finding a way to get a job which will help you make more money. It is about learning things that are extremely useful about how to live your life. And we lose sight of it. I think that universities are in trouble now because we lose sight of that. And all the stuff with trigger warnings and things of that sort, students shouldn't need trigger warnings. Students should be open to whatever is being discussed. Words are never going to hurt you. And caving into that, and caving into some of the things that are going on these campuses with college presidents from some of our best institutions resigning or being forced to resign for one reason or another, there should be more common sense and more social psychology, more applied social psychology that's used in a way that is educational for students, not disruptive.
Well, thank you for that. And we have just a couple of minutes left with you today. I can't believe it's flown by so quickly. And Chris, I want to give you a last word as well. But I'm wondering if you can just talk about Dick Alport for a minute. The people who we haven't talked about who have come up in your book, Timothy Leary and Dick Alport, who I'll let you explain who that is if people don't know. But Hathaway, also who created the MMPI. You have worked with so many great psychologists and have had friendships with so many great people. And if people want to know more about those stories, they can read the book. But yeah, I know you also, you chose to kind of, one of the last stories you tell, other than kind of telling us about your family in the book, is this diner appointment that you had with Dick. So anyway, maybe you could just walk us through your relationship with him.
Yeah, Dick and I were old friends. I got a master's degree at Wesleyan before I went to Stanford, and in the summer, Dave McClelland, who was my professor, and I was working with him at Wesleyan, and he invited a couple of his older students to come that summer and do some work too, and that's when I got to meet Dick. And Dick came with a guy named Ralph Haber. Both of them had gotten master's degrees at Wesleyan and then gone on to the PhD program in psychology at Stanford. And they came back to work with Dave, and I was working with Dave, and my wife Vera was working with Dave, and all of us got together, and we became really close friends during the summer. And then, and that's what made me decide to go to Stanford at the time, because I liked those two guys. They both had masters at Wesleyan, which I was getting, and I figured if they can make it at Stanford with a master's from Wesleyan, then maybe I will be able to make it there too. And it was mostly just out of anxiety that I went to Stanford because of those two guys making it. I thought I could do it too. And Dick and I became very close friends at Stanford. He was a couple of years ahead of me in the graduate program, and went on to Harvard. And then a couple of years later, I went on to Harvard, so we became friends again. Now, Dick was also gay, and he was the first gay person I was ever close to, and this was in the mid-50s, 1957, 58, around there. And Dick was bisexual and would date both men and women, and often Vera and I would go with Dick and his date, whether it was a man or a woman, and it was kind of fun. Then at Harvard, Dick got involved with Timothy Leary, who was also there at the time as a kind of a visiting professor for a while. And that's when they discovered psilocybin and LSD and started to work with that. They were doing some research with ministers and with prisoners to get them onto LSD, and it would be a heart-opening experience for ministerial students that might make them more aware of God. For the prisoners, it might make them more open-hearted, less aggressive, etc. That was their notion, and they were very excited about that. And then I was getting something of a reputation at the time of being a methodologist, and they wanted to do some research, some publishable research on this. It wasn't clear to me whether they were really doing serious research or simply using research as an excuse for turning on. And I think both were true. I think they really did think they could do something important at the time, but it didn't work out. I mean, the way they had to do it, they felt they had to do it in a very uncontrolled way that wouldn't have been publishable in any of the major journals. And I think for them, the experience turned out to be more important than the actual research, which was too bad. It seemed exciting, but they wanted me to join their group, but we had 4 young kids at the time, and the thing I knew about LSD was that it was a psychiatric drug, and it was supposed to make you feel what a schizophrenic feels like. And it's like having a schizophrenic experience. And I was a little afraid of it. I thought, I have a lot of responsibilities here, and these 2 guys are bachelors, and I have a family. I can't really, it may do something to my mind that I won't be able to control. So I didn't get involved with that at that time. Later, I've used those drugs, and they're fine. They're useful, and they're interesting. But at the time, it was brand new. It was in 1959, 1960. It was just before they got into trouble with the university because they promised the university they wouldn't use undergraduates in their experiments, but they broke that promise, and Harvard fired them both. Dick Alpert later went to India and became a guru. He became a religious leader called Baba Ram Das. And I really loved what he was doing. I loved that religious aspect of his life. I saw him a couple of times afterwards. He came once to the UCSC and gave a lecture in my class with a big white beard and white robes and stuff like that. And the students were quite enthralled by him. He's a terrific teacher. He always was a very good teacher. And then I lost track of him, and then he had a stroke and moved off. Well, it was before he moved to Hawaii. He was living in the Palo Alto area, and I met him for lunch Vera and I went up and met him for lunch once, and it was wonderful to see him again. It was the first time I'd seen him in about 10 or 12 years, and we had a very interesting talk where we talked about religion, and he was shocked when I told him I didn't believe in God or in any afterlife or any of that stuff, but I thought religion was important for people. And we disagreed on that one. And then he said, one of the things he said that really stood out was, he said, "So are you going to end up as a social psychologist?" And I knew that word, that question was multifaceted, because he had changed his life so dramatically twice, from being very, when I first knew him at Harvard, when we were both young assistant professors, he was hell-bent on trying to get tenure, which is not easy. When you start off at Harvard, it's very hard to get promoted to tenure, because by the time you come up for tenure, you have to demonstrate that, your department, if they're recommending you, has to demonstrate that you are among the best in your subdiscipline, which is hard to do when you're 5 years out of graduate school. But Dick really wanted tenure, and he didn't get it, of course. But he was playing the academic game very hard, and I wasn't, because I had decided that this wasn't the place I wanted to stay anyway. So we disagreed on that one. We disagreed about LSD and whether you should do the research in a really careful way or not. But at this meeting, he said, "Are you going to end up as a social psychologist?" And that was a very meaningful statement. And my response was, "I don't plan to end up at all," which was a kind of a flippant statement. And here's this guy with a stroke who was very hard for him to talk, and he started to laugh very, very hard. And then he reached out. He had one hand was totally paralyzed, one arm, and he reached out with his good hand and grabbed me by the hand. And I thought he wanted to shake hands, but then he took my hand up to his lips and he kissed my hand. And it was a very touching moment, because he and I were in disagreement about a lot of things, but what it meant to me is that the friendship was still very, very powerful. And it was a major event. I really loved that. And then we walked him. He had a guy, a medical person, who wheeled him in a wheelchair and up a ramp into the back of his van. And we said goodbye. And it was very powerful for both Vera and me.
Well, thanks for telling that story. It was powerful in the way you wrote it. It was more powerful in the way you told it. And it has been just such a privilege to hear your stories today. Chris, do you have any final thoughts as we are finishing up?
This has been an amazing time to spend with you, Elliot. I know, too, how important your family has been to you, and how you came to California in hopes that your family would come and visit, and I know that was successful for you. And, finally, maybe just a couple of words. You've had this rich relationship with Vera. Let's see, are you married now for almost 70 years?
Almost 70
yes.
years. Yeah.
Yes.
We got married in 1954, right after we graduated. And it's interesting, at the time I met Vera, and when we started to become friends, and when we were seniors at Brandeis, once we started to get serious, I told her what I used to tell all women that I was serious with at the time, that I never intended to get married. It's a kind of a pompous statement, not that she wanted to marry me or anything, but I figured I'd give fair warning. I'm never going to get married. And the reason for that is that I hadn't seen many happy marriages. I didn't think it was in the cards because my mother and father were very unhappy together. They didn't get divorced, but they weren't happy. And I had a lot of aunts and uncles, and I didn't see many happy marriages. I think there may have been one that I would say was a happy marriage. The odds didn't seem very good, but it worked out pretty well.
You have a advice or a secret that you want to share for your happy marriage?
I don't like to give advice, and there are no real secrets. I think what's really important is good communication and always giving your best friend the benefit of the doubt. But communication, the kind of communication I learned when I was leading encounter groups is really important. It's what we used to call straight talk, which is talking about your own feelings, not your hypotheses, but your feelings of anger, love, hate, distrust, whatever it is, but it's yours that you own. Never telling the other what they feel or what they should be feeling or what they did wrong, but only that they may have done something that evoked certain feelings. Whether it was the feeling was joy or the feeling was anger, but the feeling is yours and you own it. And it doesn't mean that they did something wrong. They did something that evoked that feeling, and they have a right to know about it. That's a powerful, powerful tool. And it was a major, major thing in the encounter groups that I led. And I think it's something that if everybody learned to utilize with people they care about, it would make their life a lot richer and a lot more quiescent.
Yes. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and we didn't even get to the encounter groups, but you cover it in your book, and that's an amazing kind of chapter in your life, and you and Vera together doing that, and so I loved reading about that. Are any final words from you, Elliot, for our audience of teachers of psychology?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I have final words which I talk to my closest friends about, but I don't like to hear myself talk about it because I sound like an old man saying, things aren't as good as they used to be, and so I just will say, I do think that things aren't as good as they used to be at universities in general, with all the trigger warning stuff, and I think that's a terrible mistake. I think that there are some good books about that. that are worth reading. I think the students are being coddled, and I think that they were coddled before they came to the university. I think that they're being overprotected by their parents, and then they're protected from speech, and that's problematic, and I regret that that's happening. So universities in general are becoming are doing things that I'm not happy about. I think psychology is fitting in with that, and I may be wrong. I may be just an old man saying things aren't as good as they used to be, but I do secretly believe that I was lucky in that I was in social psychology during its golden age, and it wasn't that I had anything to do with making it the golden age. It's that I benefited from the fact that exciting things were happening, exciting opportunities for research were there. I was able to get good grants. I was able to have good jobs. I was very fortunate that way. And I see the younger people in the field are struggling now and are not as happy as I was when I was in the field. And I don't think there's anything wrong with them. I think there's something wrong in a more global sense. Yeah. And maybe that will change.
Well, thanks for sharing that, and thank you for sharing your story. Folks, check out his textbooks and his autobiography, Not by Chance Alone. You will not regret that, and I know that you have enjoyed listening to this conversation today. So, Chris, thank you. Elliot, thank you. And this was a gift. Thanks.